Senior Product Manager and Resident CMR Guy, focusing on medication therapy management and payer strategies in healthcare. I'll be your guide today as we dive into industry trends and company initiatives shaping the MTM and payer space. With me for the conversation today is Outcomes Director of Payer Products, Cindy Henry. Cindy, if you want to give yourself a brief introduction.
Sure. Thanks, Ross. Cindy Henry here. As you heard, I'm Director of Payer Product. My background is varied, but centered in government-sponsored healthcare. I have background in working for a health plan as well as working on the vendor side and also pharmacy as well. So I had a little bit of everything and looking forward to bringing that perspective into conversation.
Lots of different lenses to look through for sure, Cindy. Yeah,
that's right.
Great. Yeah, well, it's awesome to have you here for today's podcast. And, we're just a couple of short weeks out from CMS and the release of the 2027 Advance Notice. Lots of areas in that content to cover, a lot of areas getting airtime across social media and otherwise. Of course, for Outcomes, a key area of focus within that advance notice is around the MTM, Medication Therapy Management Program, and seeing CMS again formalize their intent to bring back the CMR completion rate for measure year 2027. Cindy, what were your initial reactions as you saw that content and kind of saw reactions elsewhere?
I would say there was a obviously brief moment of a sigh of relief or a celebration, quickly punctuated by sort of the reality of all of the different things happening in the landscape, where this sits in that landscape. And then as excited as I am to see this come back, I'm also feeling for our health plans and, excited for how our network's going to respond to the need.
Yeah. I know for me personally, over the last year or so, as the CMR has been in the display page, we've seen the industry, reevaluate their strategies for stars. And that's not just because of CMR. That's just one little microcosm in the larger environment of the star ratings program, and even larger beyond that, the full Medicare program in its entirety. So a lot of changes that are being navigated by plans. I know we've talked about this, Cindy, it's an area that is, maybe the term is precarious right now in terms of just how to step forward down that path. I think the biggest thing that, I've heard as we've been in conversation with plans is just the strategic planning and thinking that is going into a lot of these moments right now, how to take that next step forward, whether it is in your STAR strategy or in your larger strategy as a, plan holding a Medicare contract or contracts. How do you make those next moves in the right way to continue to drive on the themes that CMS, cares about today, but also what we're seeing CMS intends to care about in the future?
So maybe, Ross, what we should do before we dive into strategies and things like that is maybe take a step back and explain what the CMR measure is and what we do here at Outcomes to help, with performance and success in that area. And then maybe just a quick little bit about how that kind of fits into the overall sort of plan and playbook for STARS and HEDIS success.
Yeah, great call out, Cindy. Let's step back for a moment just to remind our listeners of who we are as Outcomes, and as you mentioned, what we bring to the table when it comes to MTM programs and the larger STAR strategy. So Outcomes, we have many decades of experience operating and managing not only MTM programs, but many different aspects of STAR ratings programs to help with quality measure improvement. Really our, value we're bringing to the forefront is bringing local pharmacy into that entire mix. So bringing local relationships.
It's kind of having a moment, right? A community,
exactly.
Bridging community resources. I think we've seen this a little bit happening around the SDOH space, but now we're seeing
Yeah,
even more concentrated effort in this area. So piling, layering that on with,
right.
CMR, I think is important just to call out. But yeah, sorry to interrupt. Keep going.
No, you're exactly right, Cindy. Yeah, the theme of your local pharmacist. I know when I started at Outcomes in 2012, almost 14 years ago now, our tagline at that point in time was the face-to-face difference. And, I think that resounded in the industry at that point for reasons, and today it resounds for other reasons, like you're alluding to, Cindy, of kind of this harkening back to local relationships and the ability to support patients where they are, amongst the, landscape of healthcare that has continued to expand over that period of time, continued to become more cost burdened over time. How do you really kind of shrink that down, not only from a cost perspective, but just literally from the member's experience, bring that back to home? So that local relationship component is really something that we at Outcomes see as just a huge opportunity to help healthcare to continue to, to lean on those relationships that I know myself as a personal consumer of healthcare for myself and my family becomes so critical and valuable when I can engage in conversation about healthcare with a local resource that can understand our circumstance, can help us to participate in the resources in our community that can really allow us to improve our overall care, improve our quality of life, all the things that I think each one of us strives for, and really hopes to accomplish. So I think that's a great point, Cindy, from your standpoint too. And that's really what we see come out when you see the patient stories of patients that are receiving services across any of our programs, whether it's helping to improve a patient's adherence, close a gap in care, receive a comprehensive medication review. All those services benefit from a local pharmacist being able to engage into that conversation. So yeah, that's, to your point, Cindy, that is the table we see set in front of us, is a nationwide network of pharmacists eager to participate in these quality management programs for health plans and to help health plans achieve the quality strategies that they're looking to, accomplish. And now with CMS in the advance notice reiterating their intent to bring that CMR completion rate back, I think it really adds another layer of reality to, maybe over the last year, a little bit of, is it coming back? Is it not coming back? Questioning that we've heard as we've been in conversation with health plans. But ultimately, I don't know that we've ever seen that questioning from CMS. If you look back at any of the regulatory notices or rulemaking from CMS, there's really never been a question of the measure coming back. It's always been an intentionality of CMR completion rate is going to be on display page for 2 years. It's a 2-year period, very hard and set when CMS made that statement. And now we're seeing them say that 2-year period is up at the end of 2026 and 2027, measure year. Here we go. CMR completion rate is back.
Would you say, would it be safe to say rather that we kind of have been hedging our bets that it was going to follow sort of the display page cycle that we have seen, the precedent that we've seen with other star measures, even though the communications around, policy and these changes has maybe been a little bit outside of the norm from what we can normally expect, which causes a little bit of speculation and a little bit of an
Right.
unsureness for our health plans as they plan ahead. Can you kind of just talk a little bit about sort of what we were planning on and what we saw during the period of before it went to display page and during when it went to display page?
Yeah, I love that question because I think it obviously alludes to the times we find ourselves in today of, we know where we are as of this minute, of this hour, of this day, but we might not really know what tomorrow might bring from every aspect of rulemaking and regulatory changes. Each day seems to bring a new twist that maybe we weren't anticipating or we felt would have followed a different path. So yeah, I think recognizing the space that we're in, I am sure had an impact on plans as they were looking at and evaluating the intentionality of CMS to bring back the CMR completion rate measure as outcomes, we have been really heads down in, we've got a 2-year period of time where this measure is on the display page, a 2-year period of time to really reinvent what an MTM program looks like of high quality and what the components of that MTM program bring to the table. So not just focused on the outcomes of the CMR itself, but the broader MTM program and how that can continue to evolve. But within the CMR, really identifying those areas of opportunity for efficiency while balancing high clinical quality, just being super, super important. So yeah, it's definitely multifaceted in a lot of different ways, but I don't think it'd be fun any other way.
So true, so true. So you are often at the forefront of a lot of these conversations as we're meeting with our payer customers. How did the conversations change as the measure has moved into display? What shifted in payer strategy during this time that may be a little bit risky now that this
Yeah.
is becoming more important again?
Yeah. So, I think the key theme we saw, and this is, I think, not to be unexpected, was a move to display page really resulted in MTM programs being viewed as a compliance measure for
Mm,
health plans. Maintain compliance of your Medicare contract by, continuing forward the activity of your MTM program, having that continue to be a component of your Medicare contract. But the actual performance focus, of course, taking a backseat. Not at all surprising. As we alluded to, the strategies around stars have needed to shift based on the shifting landscape of stars measures over the last, handful of years. And so with the CMR measure moving to display, it allowed for health plans to get that breathing room that CMS really intended by moving the measure onto display because of the substantive changes. So, I think we saw what we anticipated and expected from plans of, kind of pulling back the driving force that they had behind CMR completion, previously in measure year 24 and earlier. And now, as we see, a further emphasis from CMS on the measure returning, we're really seeing that kind of temporary pullback with kind of getting relief, right? We're seeing the plans re-ramping up their interest in how do they scale up into 2027 in the right way and a meaningful way.
it kind of, I think about it if I'm looking from the 1,000-foot view down on all of the pressures that I see payers facing. uh, you know, Margins are reducing. So we're looking at, our sources of revenue, which used to have some room or flexibility, they're starting to flatten. At the same time, though, and we see this strong messaging from CMS around, this is about clinical outcomes, which is what STARS was supposed to always be about, what Pop Health has always been about. But I think, through the evolution of that, we've seen ways that, star ratings are gamified, star ratings, are used as kind of like a give me as far as revenue is concerned for our payers. And that's not to say that they aren't putting in the hard work to make sure that, care quality is standards are being met and that their patients are seeing improved outcomes. But at the end of the day, right, when we talk about bottom dollar and bottom line and what our investments are getting, for us, I think, looking at flattening of some of these, revenue sources is got to be concerning. And then at the same time, being asked to do more, right? Because as we know, and something we can kind of dive into is the denominator for the CMR measure is going to be increasing. So now you're doing more, you're deploying a higher cost program. How do you guarantee that you get the outcomes that you need so that you can be successful? So I think that becomes even more critical and where I would be looking, and there's lots to look at right now. So I think where it makes sense to me for CMR, if I'm looking at all of that, is really making sure that there's good proof behind the ROI, and that a program can scale. And so I think, Ross, maybe you can kind of give us a little bit of background into the growing denominator, what the drivers are for
Yeah.
that, and sort of what maybe to expect, you know, in that. And then maybe, we can talk a little bit about how to strategize for that.
Yeah, that's a really, useful dynamic is, um, the changing strategies as we've talked about already in the MTM landscape over the last year and a half. And then along with that, though, the increasing denominator that we saw at the beginning of 2025 because of standardized MTM program identification criteria. Now, maybe the saving grace that plans have been hoping for or counting on is the measure coming back in as an active measure has the result of the cut points kind of resetting and recalculating anew in 2029 based on 2027 performance. And so, I think as we've been in conversation with plans, a lot of our emphasis and thought leadership has been around providing our predictions of where those cut points will land based on the activity we've seen in these display measure years. So I think to your point, there's, of course, this component of growing denominator, a potential for growing budget, and how do you manage that budget accordingly based on the value you see as a plan from the services within the MTM program, but then also alongside of that, the value of the quality measure performance, and then stack that up against your peers and how they value the MTM program. They're putting their emphasis. And, ultimately, I think as we've run our predictions, we've seen that although the re-entry of the CMR measure brings the cut points down, right? It's kind of this release of the pressure valve that we saw building over the last decade on this measure. Although it does release that pressure, it is, I think, very eye-opening to see there are plans still continuing to make strong investments into the MTM program because of the value that they are getting out of a robust program that allows for their patients to better manage their medications and health conditions through medication therapy management. And so by nature of the star ratings program and the CMR completion rate measure, you see those plans pulling the star rating cut points up. And that upward pull results in a lot of shifts in how health plans have traditionally performed in the measure to where they would likely perform in the measure if their kind of display year performance remained steady into 2027, right? So if you as a health plan said, well, I don't see the value at CMR and I'm not going to make the investments. It's a bigger investment now in 2027 than it was in 2024. I'm going to taper back my performance expectations than we have historically. Of course, that's your prerogative. That's your strategy. Maybe that's how you're balancing your books within the other star measures that are a focus and an emphasis for yours. But recognize that other health plans may not be playing that same game. They may be playing their MTM program in a way that they've developed a really high quality focus to their MTM program that's allowing them to see, that total cost of care value from their program and really support an investment into the program that drives a much higher completion rate of CMRs than maybe you're really focused on. So I think that's going to be the important and interesting part of this, Cindy, is, contemplating there's a lot of different aspects to how 2027 will play out. As I mentioned, we've, done our due diligence to predict out where we feel like that's going to land. And we're looking forward to supporting payers as they're strategizing in this space and really building their own business cases within their own organizations around, a robust program that can not only deliver star rating success, but also total cost of care success, or name it, whatever measuring stick you're bringing to the MTM program. How can we help you to articulate that measuring stick accordingly so you can really allow the investment to be supported. So I think that's going to be, parts of it, Cindy, is, how do you kind of put all those puzzle pieces together as a health plan to really make a picture at the end of the day that's compelling for you and for your contract to perform.
So Ross, I have two things as you were kind of talking about that I think would be really good to kind of elaborate on. One is we talk about total cost of care and the role that plays in total cost of care, which I think is a goal and a metric outside of stars alone. So when we talk about, how does CMR drive total cost of care or drive, value-based care delivery, can you kind of talk about the factors there? Put yourself in, an executive's position. How does CMR control total cost of care, outside of star ratings and performance? And then I think the other thing that you touched on that'll be really important is, what is like the one key thing as payers are looking at expanded denominators, what is the key thing that they need to keep in mind as they're planning ahead for, how are they going to deploy these programs and scale these programs?
Yeah, I think that's a really great question, Cindy, just from the standpoint of, sitting that in that executive's chair and, as they look out onto the landscape of the CMR completion rate in the coming year as it returns to an active star measure. The first thing that I always think about from the value proposition of the CMR is just the multifaceted nature of the CMR itself. When you hear one story of the value of a CMR, you've really just heard one of those stories of the patient's experience in that CMR, right? There is, potential to improve adherence performance. There's a potential to reduce emergent care needs. There may just be an opportunity to strengthen a local relationship between a pharmacist and a patient to really understand that full and comprehensive medication regimen that the patient is taking. And so by nature of that, it really comes down to what are the strategic pillars that the health plan is looking to improve, and how can they design their MTM program in a way that the CMR can help to, accentuate and help to support all of those different strategic pillars for the organization. So I think I might turn the question right back on you, Cindy, for a minute. Given your background, I'd love to put you into the executive role as well. What are those first steps that you'd take given the news that the CMR completion rate is coming back?
I think the first thing to do is go back to projection modeling. Make sure that you understand, as the criteria changes and we're expecting more members to fall into the denominator. I do feel that, understanding what that's going to look like and what the scope of the scale is, I think is one starting point.
Right.
Think then once you understand, what is the need here, then you start to look at levers. And as a health plan, you look at what vendors do I have relationships with, what campaigns am I deploying, how do I best leverage the staff I already have and the relationships I have, and obviously, thinking about the engagement factor. How do we keep folks engaged? So lots of different areas within the health plan working together, I think, on this is pretty important, but understanding what that new demand is going to be is critical for day one. Then when you
Right.
start to work on how do I scale, right? And I think
Yep.
with outcomes, that's one of the strongest areas for us is our ability to scale quickly. And that also goes back to supporting the community pharmacies that are part of our network as well, and making sure that we're bringing them opportunities to diversify their revenue streams away from just dispensing. And so that's
Yeah.
kind
I
of
think
hard
that's
to
a good point, Cindy. Yeah, yeah, is the community pharmacies as well. And I know the one of the very first questions that we're getting from health plans is how are you helping those community pharmacies to prepare for 2027, right? Given this news. So, briefly from that standpoint too, how are we helping those community pharmacies to prepare for 27?
Well, Ross as our CMR guru and CMR product owner. I think you're probably the best person to kind of talk about some of the things that we're looking at, some of the areas that you've been researching as we look to you're responding to this demand. So, obviously I have an inside look on a lot of this, but I think, maybe you can kind of share some of the things that you've been looking at and some of the direction that we're heading for CMR.
Sure, turn it right back to me. Yeah, as you already alluded to, community pharmacy and the scalability of our nationwide network, but also just recognizing the value of those local relationships as they're engaging with their own patients and providing MTM services. We know that that's really where, all of these great stories really truly come from as their origin in terms of the value of CMR services. We also recognize that a CMR at the end of the day, if you look at the core definition of the service, is something that is intended to empower patients to self-manage their medications and health conditions. And again, I mentioned before, a CMR and the value of the CMR can be multifaceted. And that means that if you have opportunities to sit and listen in and participate in a comprehensive medication review, they all sound very different. And that's because every patient is bringing their own healthcare context to that conversation. By nature of that, as all the pharmacists listening into this podcast will know, you get near the holidays and there's going to be conversation about the holidays. You get near a birthday or an anniversary, there's going to be conversations on those topics as well. So there is this kind of core conversation that exists within a CMR, regardless of the complexity of the medication regimen that might come into play, the what the patient is bringing to the table in terms of their knowledge of their medication regimen. So there's that core amount of conversation and time that's going to be happening regardless of the profile of the patient maybe that you're bringing into the CMR conversation. At Outcomes, we're really focused on how do we help that core part of the conversation continue to be such an integral and valuable part of the CMR, and then remove the constraints, the burden of additional documentation that might be necessary surrounding that conversation. So really, essentially, remove some of that documentation burden and allow the pharmacists to really step in at another level with their clinical knowledge and use that CMR as an opportunity to kind of no longer be maybe required to curate data and instead allow for opportunity to spend time in the clinical focus of the CMR. So that's a big part, to your point, Cindy, as we think about prepping and helping pharmacies to really get ready for the return of this measure, is to give tools and reimagine what our workflow looks like, what the journey of receiving a CMR looks like, to ensure that patients can get the best care possible and pharmacists have the most streamlined way to do that. And using the latest technologies to support that is going to be a critical component. I mean, you know this better than I do, Cindy, but you look at all of the new innovation models that are coming to the table from CMMI and just the industry and how it's shifting with new technologies that are coming to the forefront. And that is, rightfully so, allowing us new ways to think about care delivery. So I think there's some exciting opportunities for us to really continue to see the patient remain at the center of that. And how do we help the pharmacy to continue to wrap themselves around and support the patient with those new capabilities, new technologies. So it's going to be an exciting time over 2026 as we look forward to 2027.
Yeah, I was just thinking as you were kind of talking through some of the ways that we're innovating and sort of the challenges that we hear about, just thinking through. So as we're looking for increased efficiency in the CMR, I think there's a couple things that are just realities that we can't shift. One is that
Sure.
the population that is typically targeted for a CMR are often isolated. So, when you get that person on a phone who's genuinely interested, that is always going to be a reality. And you want
Right.
embrace that because you want to have a great patient experience and to build that relationship, which can then be leveraged later for further engagement, right?
Right, totally.
It's important, right? Because if we're really talking about extending access, leveraging our pharmacies, letting them practice at the top of their license, you know, and inserting them where they really should be, which is part of the care team, really that requires a real close look at the realities of the environment that they're working in
Yes.
and sort of the hurdles that they face with doing this. And so we hear about, wanting to have more predictability around some of these services and also being able to kind of have a better sense for how do I appropriately staff this so that, I can make sure to take advantage of these
Make the model work. Yeah.
streams. So maybe you can talk a little bit more in detail about some of the research that you've done and what you've found as you've done some of that research around like, here are the things that we feel like we can solve for as we're thinking about solution redesign.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks, Cindy. It's a really good question. And I think, it gets to the core of how are we, in that preparation, what does that actually look like and feel like for 2027? And so interestingly enough, I think the themes from our continual research remain fairly constant and steady. So, what I will share may not be groundbreaking in nature, but it kind of reverberates in terms of the sense that these are they're not net new, but they are foundational.
Mhm.
And so, it's things like, to your point, predictability and helping to really understand the work model that surrounds MTM program support at the
Mhm.
individual pharmacy level, at a maybe regional or district level, at a full organization level.
Right.
Those are all really important components of not just a solid MTM program, but really a solid clinical services program in totality within a pharmacy setting. And then even within that, it's understanding the journey, the workflow model of who does what as a part of the CMR. So you'll see more from outcomes as we're continuing to evolve the concepts of those roles. Today, if you look at our outcomes platform, you'll recognize it's the same experience for all. And we see that that's a really great opportunity for us to help to better support those individual roles as they're contributing in helping to serve your patients. Those roles in other care settings result in different experiences, and why not in the MTM space as well, right? So again, these are themes that aren't groundbreaking per se, but I think the technology that we can bring to the nationwide pharmacy network that we have at scale is what gets me really excited to see these capabilities really flourish and help pharmacies. So I'm really, really excited to be a part of, some of the help we can bring to the forefront of tools that can, reduce some of that workflow burden. Like you said, help pharmacists to practice at the top of their license, for example. We always say that as something we aspire to do. And I think we're really excited in 2026 to deploy new capabilities to really show that in action. Well, this has been fun to have conversation with you, Cindy. Obviously, there is plenty more that will be evolving over the coming year, and we're really excited as outcomes to bring updates as we progress forward. The return of the CMR completion rate, it's one of the most important shifts in the STARS landscape heading into measure year 27, and plans that act early, rebuilding MTM capacity, tightening workflows, aligning to predicted cut points, they'll be in the best position when the 2029 star rating cycle arrives. So if you haven't already, jump over to outcomesmtm.com to read our blog post that contains the cut point predictions that we've talked about here today. We've also got some identification rate analysis in there. So it's definitely an opportunity for you all to get the resources that you need to support your preparation and those steps that Cindy was alluding to of contemplating and doing the analysis right now to really then identify what your strategic priorities are for the remainder of 2026 as you prepare for 2027. But for today, thank you all for listening. We're committed to bringing you the latest insights in healthcare innovation and strategy. If you found this valuable, subscribe so you don't miss our next episode. Until then, stay curious.